Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, a comment addressing widespread concerns. Pentagon's #3 official says the strikes on Iran will not drain munitions needed for any Taiwan contingency, and that the U.S. is still laser focused on the Indo-Pacific.
I think we need to work hard on the defense industrial base, but nobody should get the wrong impression. We're ahead of the problem.
Iranian air defense systems are made up of Chinese and Russian equipment, and they failed to defend against the strikes by Israel and the United States. We take a closer look. To discuss, a former U.S. defense attaché in Beijing and Assistant Secretary of State weighs in. The Chinese foreign minister calling his counterparts in the Middle East and telling them that China will not accept the, quote, indiscriminate use of force. During the past 4 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, however, Beijing has remained silent regarding Moscow. The stage is set for China's biggest annual political event in Beijing. What's on the CCP's 2026 agenda, and what's in this new 5-year plan aimed at competing with the U.S.? We bring you the highlights. Will the strikes on Iran deplete the U.S. munitions needed to counter a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan? The Pentagon's #3 official says no. Albert Colby's comment on Tuesday comes after a Wall Street Journal report saying that the U.S. has been quickly consuming air defense interceptors and other munitions in the Iran war. Here's Colby testifying before the Senate.
And should our potential adversaries around the world not read these articles about we're running low on munitions and think it's time to
Absolutely.
maybe move on Taiwan?
I think we need to work hard on, sorry, excuse me to interrupt, but I think we need to work hard on the defense industrial base, but nobody should get the wrong impression. We're ahead of the problem.
A Democratic lawmaker questioned Colby on whether the Indo-Pacific is still a top priority, a concern shared by U.S. allies in Asia.
We are laser focused on the first island chain.
The first island chain is a line of defense that prevents Beijing from launching submarine-based nuclear missile attacks against the U.S. Taiwan is part of that island chain.
And I am personally focused. The secretary I know is personally focused. Obviously, people like Admiral Paparo are personally focused on watching things very carefully and operating from a position of strong and clear but quiet and very close alignment with our allies and partners in the region. My first trip was to Korea and Japan. My first call, I believe, is as on Operation Epic Fury, was the Minister of Defense of the Philippines, Secretary of Defense of the Philippines.
Colby says the goal of the strikes on Iran is to degrade its military power. He noted that Israel and Gulf partners are willing to play a bigger role in maintaining security in the Middle East, and all of these factors combined would allow the U.S. to focus on the first island chain. The Iranian regime's air defense systems are reportedly made up of Chinese and Russian equipment, and they appear to have failed to defend against the attacks from Israel and the United States. NTD's Jason Perry takes a closer look.
The war against Iran began after the United States and Israel launched a surprise attack against senior officials of the Iranian regime. A defense analyst at the International Institute for Strategic Studies explained.
The Supreme Leader was in a morning meeting together with his defense minister, the chief of the armed forces, the head of the IRGC, who were all killed in that strike. Subsequently, you saw the U.S.-Israeli strikes hitting especially air defenses.
Iran's air defense networks were in place to prevent such an attack. However, they failed to protect the country's leadership, as well as other targets in the country. And on Tuesday, the Israeli Air Force reported striking more air defense systems in Iran. The Washington Institute reported in December that Iran has relied primarily on Russian systems for its air defense. And the Hudson Institute reported last year that Iran was believed to have acquired Chinese air defense systems, such as Chinese surface-to-air missiles. But how did the air defense systems fail? According to the Vision Times, a scholar at Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research, Xu Sao Huang, says the U.S. likely used a combination of physically destroying Iran's air defense systems, as well as electronic interference and cyber operations to disable Iran's radar systems. And an associate researcher at Taiwan's Institute for Cybersecurity and Decision-Making Simulation, Lin Chaolun, says the Iran-China military cooperation had a structural imbalance favoring offense over defense, meaning more time and effort was spent on how to attack rather than how to defend against attacks, adding that the Chinese supplied air defense assets struggled to counter sophisticated electronic suppression. And by contrast, the United States technology has been repeatedly tested in combat, proving high adaptability and reliability. Jason Perry, NTD News.
And to discuss, we spoke with retired Brigadier Air Force General David Stilwell. He has served as U.S. Defense Attaché in Beijing and Assistant Secretary of State. On Tuesday, U.S. Undersecretary of Defense Elbridge Colby said that reports of dwindling U.S. munition stockpiles following strikes in Iran should not be misread as weakening deterrence in the Taiwan Strait. And Taiwan's military separately has said it's not detected any PLA aircraft near its air defense identification zone since February 27th. So that coincides with the start of the Iran attack as well as the Lunar Festival. So perhaps China's just on holiday. But how do you think China is reading this so far?
I think they have taken another message since Venezuela that this administration is not afraid to act. And although dialogue would be the best outcome, we've wasted way too much time in dialogue with Venezuela, with Iran for sure, with the JCPOA, which only guaranteed they were going to get a nuclear weapon and we were going to pay for it. It was a terrible idea. And obviously with the PRC as well. So showing that you are not afraid to act in defense of your own interests is never a bad thing. It's called deterrence.
In terms of support so far, we do know that last year Iran, Russia, and China signed a strategic partnership. But so far, in terms of support, China has promised strong moral backing, but no military support. But we do know, at least according to reports, that after last year's 12-day war, that Iran switched from the U.S.-based GPS system to China's Beidou system. It swapped out a lot of gear for Chinese-made tech from U.S. or Israeli ones. And the Hudson Institute reported that Iran was believed to have acquired Chinese air defense systems. How are you seeing Chinese tech playing out in Iran and also the failures we saw in Venezuela?
Well, I guess first off, Beijing is again proving to be a fickle partner, ally, whatever you want to call it. So, and don't forget, back to Ukraine, in 2011 and 13, the PRC and Ukraine signed an agreement, a strategic partnership that guaranteed that they would protect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Of course, that invasion in 2014 and again in 22, the PRC sat on the sidelines, and they're going to do it again here. And so any concerns that maybe the PRC will help Iran in anything other than some sort of an advantageous way to PRC businesses or PRC access to energy is unfounded.
Beijing has been purchasing nearly 90% of Iran's crude oil supplies, but since the recent U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran, oil exports that would normally transit the Strait of Hormuz have come to a standstill. What are China's options? NTD's Arlene Richards explains the dilemma.
China is deeply concerned about the spread of war into neighboring countries.
On Tuesday, Beijing called for an immediate halt to U.S.-Israeli strikes in Iran.
Paired with the raid in Venezuela earlier this year, there's been a pretty significant impact on China's oil supplies.
For decades, the Chinese Communist Party has been a consistent buyer of Iran and Venezuela's crude oil. It ramped up purchases of Iranian oil to record levels 3 years ago amid talks between Iran and world powers to revive a 2015 nuclear deal that would have lifted significant sanctions on Iranian oil exports.
China gets somewhere between, let's say, 15 and 23% of its seaborne oil from Iran.
Since the strikes began on Saturday, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow channel off of Iran's coast. Nearly 20% of global oil usually gets transported through the strait every day from several Gulf countries. But before the U.S.-Israel strike, the CCP was importing a little over 1 million barrels of Iranian oil per day, up from 700,000 barrels 3 years ago. The two countries had made a deal that gets around the multiple sanctions on Iran and saves Beijing $8 to $10 per barrel against benchmark pricing. Iran was bypassing the sanctions by shipping its oil through Malaysia and Indonesia. Their arrangement has saved Beijing billions of dollars annually and provided Iran with its primary revenue stream.
Donald Trump tightens the noose on the shadow fleet that has enabled all of that. The bigger target is actually communist China, which is increasingly in a box, is going to have to start buying its oil, the huge percentage of its oil, on the open market at full price.
Beijing was buying about 17% of its overall crude oil supplies from Iran and Venezuela. It buys another 18 to 20% from Russia, which accounts for nearly 50% of Russia's total crude exports. But what if the conflict drags on?
Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks.
Beijing has been stockpiling a significant amount of oil, and it had already begun ramping down its imports of Iranian oil in 2026 in exchange for more Russian oil. But Beijing has also been relying on other Middle East countries for oil, including the biggest supplier in the region, Saudi Arabia. Those exports also went through the Strait of Hormuz, which is closed. If Russia agrees to a peace deal with Ukraine, Beijing could lose another big oil supplier. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
As Operation Epic Fury enters its 5th day, Beijing is weighing in. On Wednesday, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held phone calls with his counterparts in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Wang called for an immediate end to the strike, saying that the, quote, indiscriminate use of force is unacceptable. He warned that the red line of protecting civilians must not be crossed. Wang also called for the protection of vital shipping lanes. Critics, however, are pointing out a double standard. Throughout Russia's 4-year invasion of Ukraine, Beijing hasn't once issued a similar condemnation of Moscow. And on the so-called red line, U.S. officials, including President Trump, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of War, have repeatedly stressed that civilian sites are not being targeted in this operation. Meanwhile, Wang confirmed that China will send a special envoy to the Middle East to begin mediation efforts. The stage is set for China's biggest annual political event. The 2 sessions, which include the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference and the National People's Congress, kick off this Wednesday and Thursday in Beijing. This year, officials aren't just setting the 2026 agenda, they're also mapping out China's strategic blueprint for the years 2026 through 2030. Before we dive into China's plans for the military budget, the AI arms race, and the economy, here's a quick primer on what the 2 sessions actually are. The National People's Congress is theoretically the highest organ of state power in China. The Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference is a national-level advisory body. Both bodies operate under the control of the Chinese Communist Party. Here are some highlights of this year's 2 sessions. Premier Li Qiang will deliver the government work report on Thursday. Analysts expect a GDP growth target between 4.5% and 5%. But the real story is the shift. Will Beijing finally move away from exports and investment toward a consumer-led economy? This comes as the International Monetary Fund warns of weakening domestic demand in China, despite a massive $1.2 trillion trade surplus in 2025. For 3 years, defense spending growth has set at 7.2%, consistently outpacing the economy. With the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army approaching next year, all eyes are on whether that budget climbs even higher or if fiscal pressures forces a slowdown. As the tech war with the U.S. heats up, Beijing is doubling down, expecting to invest heavily in high-end AI chips, quantum technology, 6G, humanoid robots, and so on. China's roadmap for achieving self-sufficiency in key technologies, energy, and raw materials is noteworthy. In Beijing, who isn't in attendance is often as important as who is. The military delegation size and personnel changes serve as a window into the depth of Xi Jinping's power consolidation during his 3rd term. On March 2nd, just before the opening of the 2 sessions, 3 generals were purged. This after 9 were removed in February, and Zhang Youxia, the highest-ranking military officer after Xi Jinping, was purged in January. The new 5-year plan will likely serve as a blueprint for Hong Kong, signaling its further integration into the Greater Bay Area region and a continued softening of its special status distinction. Finally, with President Trump scheduled to visit China at the end of March, we'll be watching closely for any softening of anti-U.S. rhetoric during these meetings. Coming up, protests continue to break out across China due mostly to social injustice and financial hardships. This comes as the Chinese economy slows down. And a woman in London is brutally assaulted by a male bus driver while she was holding a banner describing Beijing's decades-long persecution of her faith, Falun Gong. She shares her insight into what's behind the violence. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer, zooming in on social unrest occurring inside China. Protests of varying sizes continue to break out across the country, all while the Chinese regime holds a major political event in Beijing. In recent years, more protests have been taking place due to financial hardships as the Chinese economy takes a downturn. On Monday, thousands of people demonstrated in front of a city hall in southern China's Fujian province. Media reports say they are victims of an investment firm which recently closed most of its offices but has yet to return its clients' money. For some victims who are senior citizens, the funds represent their entire life savings. Moving to southeastern Jiangsu province, dozens of sanitation workers launched a strike on Tuesday, demanding overdue wages. And in Zhejiang, videos show police clashing with protesters last week. The protests began after an employee died in an accident during a company gathering, and the company refused to take responsibility. Many citizens joined in support. Police arrested some protesters. Social media videos of the incident were censored on China's internet. An account on X, which publishes videos about protests in China almost daily, has released its own survey on the situation. According to its data, in January alone, 50 incidents of group demonstrations in China were recorded. 34% of them were organized by Chinese workers, mainly due to unpaid wages. Other protest groups included peasants, homeowners, investors, and families of people who died in accidents. What's more, protests in January took place in 19 provinces. That's close to two-thirds the number of provinces in China. China this week will outline how it plans to push forward in its technological race with the West. The Chinese Communist Party will publish its annual work report and budget plans on Thursday at the opening session of the year's most important meeting. It will also unveil its next five-year plan, setting priorities for industrial policy.
University of Hong Kong Assistant Professor Brian Wong says he expects to see a rollout of what he described as advanced digital technologies and management approaches.
And that, of course, includes the sort of nascent technologies, including biotech, pharmaceutical technology, as well as space and deep space tech research. But it would also, imply that old and traditional manufacturing sectors are going to see a significant makeover when it comes to the implementation or introduction of robotics and AI in traditional manufacturing sectors.
The gathering in Beijing marks a year since Chinese AI developers drew global attention for sudden leaps in capability. That's despite tight U.S. restrictions on access to advanced chips and chip-making equipment. Last year's release of DeepSeek, the Chinese AI model, triggered a global tech share sell-off and reshaped assumptions for China's technology competitiveness against the United States. China has also flaunted humanoid robots that have shown major leaps in hardware technology. Despite the hype, analysts say, China's emerging industries will not be enough to power its targeted 5% GDP growth in the coming years. Some suggest Beijing will have to continue relying on exports to prop up its economy, while China's plans for industries that affect supply chains are also key as they become instruments of geopolitical pressure. Recent moves to beef up export controls of rare earths and low-end semiconductors have disrupted global supply chains and underscored China's economic leverage.
The reality is today Beijing and Washington are enmeshed in a very complex opposition relationship. Cooperation from the two powers is inevitable. And yet there's also vigorous, fierce competition in relation to advanced technologies, in relation to domestic growth and self-sufficiency, in relation to military and security capabilities.
The NPC meeting comes just weeks before U.S. President Donald Trump is due to visit China's Xi Jinping in Beijing late March. Technology controls and supply chains are expected to be among the big talking points.
Attacks influenced by the Chinese Communist Party against a faith group are raising concerns. Just a couple of days ago in London, a male bus driver brutally assaulted a female Falun Gong practitioner outside the British Museum. The incident is an extension of Beijing's ongoing persecution of the faith group, which has been taking place for nearly 27 years. NTD's Flora Hua spoke with the victim to learn firsthand what happened.
bruises on her face, and broken nails. All this to silence a volunteer as she tries to raise awareness of Beijing's persecution of her faith group Falun Gong. Zhang Chunping has been doing volunteer work for over a decade. Last Monday, she was brutally attacked while speaking to Chinese tourists outside the British Museum.
There was a Chinese tour guide on the bus. She reprimanded me loudly, saying I wasn't allowed to speak, and her attitude was extremely hostile.
To avoid escalating tensions, Zhang stopped talking to the tourists, but she was still holding a banner, hoping the tourists can read about the persecution. A driver rushed out of the tour bus, robbed the banner from Zhang alongside her cell phone, and threw them away. And he knocked her down onto the ground twice.
After being knocked down, when my head and body hit the ground, I was in great pain. After knocking me to the ground, he straddled me with both legs to prevent me from getting up and continued beating me.
The UK police is investigating the incident, labeling it a criminal case. The bus company FCD is under EG Travel, which caters to Chinese visitors. The company's own website shows it has received a number of CCP officials since 2011, including former Premier Li Keqiang in 2015. It also works with the Chinese embassy in Ireland. Zhang shared that a Chinese tour guide once told her that the CCP has regularly threatened tour agencies to avoid Falun Gong practitioners and fed them with a lot of CCP propaganda. But she said she will continue her volunteer work despite the trauma from this incident.
Many of my fellow Chinese people are living under propaganda without access to truthful information.
When I asked her if she has something to say to the people who abused her, she said,
I do not hate them. I only hope they can hear the truth and understand what Falun Gong really is, not the version portrayed by the CCP. I hope to reach them through my compassion. Please stop hating Falun Gong and stop attacking its practitioners. We're peacefully sharing the truth.
52-year-old Zhang is originally from China. The CCP had jailed her and thrown her into labor camps for her faith multiple times before she fled to the Netherlands. Flora Hua, NTD News.
London police have arrested 3 men suspected of spying for China. One of them is the husband of a lawmaker from Britain's governing Labour Party. The suspects were detained in London and Wales for allegedly assisting a foreign intelligence service in violation of the country's National Security Act.
These arrests come amid growing concerns about China espionage and political interference in the UK. The UK's security service, MI5, warned last year that Chinese agents have made targeted and widespread efforts to recruit lawmakers and others. It says they have used LinkedIn and cover companies. Beijing denies the allegations. Security Minister Dan Jarvis has expressed alarm over what he calls an increasing pattern of covert activity from Chinese state-linked actors targeting UK democracy.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.